Sunday arrived like a soft blanket settling over my shoulders. The tiny home was still dim and quiet, wrapped in early morning blue. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was pale, and the pear tree's bare branches tapped gently on the glass, like a small hello. I stayed under the quilt for one more breath. Then my feet found my warm socks, thick and woolly, and the day felt kinder immediately. The floorboards were cool but not unfriendly, just cool enough to make the warmth feel earned. I walked slowly into the kitchenette. No rushing today. Sunday didn't ask for speed. It asked for softness. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Click. A tiny flame. A tiny sigh. And then the quiet promise of warm water. I opened the curtains halfway. Light seeped in slowly, touching the wooden counter and turning it honey-colored. Dust floated in the beam like tiny lazy snow. I brought my little pebble speaker closer and chose a playlist. Something gentle. Piano. A little guitar. The kind of music that feels like someone smiling with their eyes closed. The kettle began to whisper, then sing. I poured hot water over tea leaves and watched the steam rise. The tea turned amber, and warmth traveled into my hands through the mug. Miso, my cat, stretched on her cushion, round and calm. She blinked at me like the sun had just entered the room. Miso patted over and brushed her tail against my ankle. A quiet greeting that didn't need words. I scratched behind her ears, and she purred like a small sleepy engine starting up. Sunday meant pancakes. Not as a reward, not as a celebration, just something steady. Something you can count on. I pulled out my ceramic mixing bowl, the one with the tiny crack on the rim. It had survived enough little accidents to feel trustworthy. Flour fell into the bowl like soft snow. A pinch of salt. A spoon of sugar. Baking powder that puffed into the air when I shook it. I cracked an egg into a small cup. The yolk sat bright and stubborn like a tiny sun refusing to hide. Milk followed. Then melted butter. And I stirred slowly with my wooden spoon. The batter thickened, smooth as river stones. My whisk made a low, comforting sound against the bowl, and the music stayed soft in the background, like a warm blanket for the room. I warmed the pan, rubbed a little butter across it, and listened to the quiet sizzle. The first ladle of batter spread into a pale circle. Little bubbles rose and popped one by one. Small, patient, and calm. As the pancake cooked, the tiny home began to fill with that familiar sweet smell. The smell that always feels like childhood. For a moment, I remembered my grandmother's kitchen, the way she used to hum while she cooked. Always the same tune. Always the same steady hands. I flipped the pancake when the edges turned golden. The underside was perfect. Warm brown. Freckled. Like it had been kissed by the pan. I felt a quiet little pride. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't ask for applause. Miso sat near my feet and watched seriously, like she was supervising. I offered her a tiny crumb. She sniffed it, decided it was beneath her, and walked away with her dignity intact. I laughed softly and kept cooking. Soon, the plate held a small, warm tower of pancakes. I topped them with bananas and frozen berries that softened slowly on the heat. Then I poured maple syrup in slow amber ribbons, letting it shine and pool at the edges. I carried breakfast to the little table by the window. Outside, sparrows hopped along the fence. One shook itself like it had woken up late and was trying to look busy. The pear tree swayed gently. One stubborn leaf trembled, still hanging on even though winter had already asked it to let go. I ate slowly, each bite soft in the middle and a little crisp at the edges. Bananas tasting like sunshine, even in cold weather. Berries bursting tart and bright. The tiny home stayed quiet. Only the faint click of my fork, the low music, and the soft wind outside. When the plate was empty, I wrapped both hands around my tea mug and let the warmth linger. The world could keep spinning without me for a while. I washed the dishes gently. Warm water. Soap bubbles shimmering in the light. Plates lined neatly on the rack, each one a small, quiet achievement. Miso watched from her cushion and blinked slowly, the way cats do when everything feels safe. Then I tidied the tiny home. Not fast, not perfectly, just slowly, like a ritual. I folded the blanket at the end of the bed, stacked the books that drifted onto the floor, wiped the counter with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon, and opened the window for a minute. Cold air slipped in, clean and fresh. It carried the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, just enough to remind me there was a whole world outside. And then I closed it again, keeping the warmth in. My boots waited by the door, still dusty from yesterday. I sat on the small bench and pulled them on, tying the laces carefully. Warm socks inside boots feels like protection, like the day can't touch you too sharply. Outside, the air was crisp. The grass still held a faint shine from last night's rain. I walked slowly toward the trail, letting my breath fog in front of me. Trees stood bare but strong, like old friends. Leaves lay curled on the path. Each step made a soft crunch. Somewhere above, a bird called once, then fell quiet, as if it was listening for an answer. I picked up a few pine cones and a twig shaped like a question mark. I didn't need them for anything, but it felt good to bring small pieces of the outside world back home, like souvenirs from a gentle adventure. Near the trail, I found wild rosemary still clinging to life. I brushed it lightly with my fingers. The scent was sharp and clean. It stuck to my skin like a memory. I stood there for a moment with my eyes closed, wind brushing my cheeks, quiet filling the space inside me. Then I walked back home slowly. No need to rush. Not today. Back inside, warmth greeted me like a familiar hug. I hung my coat, set my boots by the door, and let the tiny home feel like a lantern again. Sunday still had time left, and I wanted to fill it with small, gentle things. So I decided to bake cookies. Nothing complicated, just something simple that makes the whole home smell sweet. Butter and sugar, a soft scrape of spoon against bowl, a splash of vanilla that smelled like comfort, flour drifting like tiny snow when I poured it in. I rolled the dough into small round shapes and placed them on a tray. The oven warmed slowly. Then I slid the tray inside. Soon the kitchen filled with a soft, sweet scent, the kind that makes you breathe deeper without realizing. While they baked, I sat by the window with my notebook. The pages were slightly wrinkled from being carried around, but that made it feel honest. I wrote a few lines about the morning, not trying to be clever, just trying to hold it. Writing can feel like tying a ribbon around a moment so it doesn't drift away too quickly. When the cookies were done, the edges were golden. The tray made a faint ticking sound as it cooled. I broke one cookie in half. Steam rose from the soft center. Warm, sweet, gentle. I ate slowly and smiled without meaning to. In the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice felt like home, like a soft thread connecting me to a place that still held me, even from far away. We talked about small things, the neighbor's puppy, the weather, a recipe she wanted to try. No urgency, no heaviness, just love, quiet and steady. When the call ended, I chose another playlist. Still calm, still soft. Then I pulled out my knitting basket. A half-finished scarf waited there patiently, yarn a muted, mossy green. I started knitting slowly, letting the needles click gently. Click, click. A tiny rhythm that matched the music. Miso climbed into my lap, turned around twice, then settled with a small, satisfied sigh, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Time moved differently in the tiny home. Afternoon light slid across the floor, stretching the shadows softly. Outside, the wind made the pear tree tap the window again, not loud, just enough to remind me it was there. I paused sometimes just to listen, to the music, to the heater hum, to Miso's purr, to my own breathing. As evening came closer, my stomach asked gently for dinner. So I made soup, carrots, onions, potatoes. I chopped slowly, the knife making a soft, steady sound against the wooden board. The pot began to simmer. Steam rose, warm and savory. I toasted bread until it turned golden, rubbed it with a clove of garlic, the scent sharp and comforting. Then I set the table. Even though it was only me, it felt like a small, kind gesture, like telling the day it mattered. I ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful. Warm soup, crisp bread, soft music. Outside, the sky faded into dusk, and in the distance, a single light appeared in someone else's window. Another home, another quiet evening unfolding. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen again, wiped the counters, washed the last bowl. The tiny home looked calm and cared for, like it was resting too. Then I ran a bath. The water sounded like a hush, constant and soothing. Steam fogged the small bathroom mirror. When I stepped out, my skin felt warm and light. I put on fresh socks, even softer than the morning ones. Warm socks on a Sunday night feels like a promise to be gentle with yourself. I returned to the main room with tea and one last cookie. The playlist had shifted to slower songs, dreamy and distant. The lamp cast a warm circle of light, like a little sun inside the room. Miso curled beside me and purred steadily. I wrapped myself in a blanket and looked around. Small home, warm glow, simple meals, soft music.